What's up? So, with Game of Thrones now firmly part of pop culture, House of the Dragon returning soon and Duncan Egg on the way, in this video I wanted to go back to the real stories that is behind all of it, the Wars of the Roses. Yeah, of course it's up. And by the way, it is a common mistake to call them a war, but no, they are wars with S at the end. Yeah, it's a series of conflicts. And another purpose of this video is to prove that real history is way more fun and entertaining than you think it is. Yeah, just give it a chance, okay? And moreover, to make it a bit more intuitive, we're going to map real historical figures onto Game of Thrones characters, because why not? It may sound dumb, but just stay with me, okay? Please, please, please. Yeah, so let's begin. When we talk about, let's say, the year 1453, it is basically the default setting for the end of the 100 Years' War between England and France. And England, well, England loses everything except Calais. So England pulls back into itself and falls into a deep, deep crisis, one that lasts about 30 years, honestly, even a bit more. And the crux of it, so basically the English lords look around and say, well, fellas, we have successfully lost France. We're stuck on this damn island, and now we have got tens of thousands of unemployed soldiers with nothing to do. So, should we kill each other? Yep, that's what happened. But the Wars of the Roses didn't start in exactly 1455, even though that sedate history books like to slap on the beginning of the conflicts. No, the roots go much, much deeper. We need to rewind to the 1420s, when things still looked good for England, back when England controlled Paris, when England held half of France, and when Timothy Chalamet had just smashed everyone inside. Yeah, think of the famous victory at Agincourt in 1415. Yeah, the good old days. The real shit show started in 1422 when the great king of England dies, the guy whose nickname is the Warrior King, the absolute legend Henry V, the man who caught arrows with his face and just kept going, a mighty, mighty bloke. And one of the reasons the crisis begins developing is this: for almost the entire period we're describing, the country is ruled by, well, you can't even call him a minor king. Henry VI becomes king when his father dies and he's literally a baby. Literally 8 months old. And who is the king in the Game of Thrones? Yeah, let's make this clear. Henry VI is Robert Baratheon, Bobby B. Remember it? I will be using his pick now. And as a king, he is just as incompetent, but for completely different reasons. So, because the English monarchy at the time absolutely depended on the theater of kingship, the king must hand out gestures, distribute land, intimidate parliament when needed. So basically, the king had to be a walking, talking display of authority. Now, imagine that instead of a grown, terrifying warrior king, you suddenly have an infant. A baby can't pull up strapped and press on parliament and say, we need funding for the war, bitches. And by the 15th century, England already had a system where no tax could be approved without parliament's concern. And parliament wasn't just a cute decoration, it was full of powerful people with their own guilds and businesses, essentially a representative institution, well, representative only of the elites, but still. So naturally, Parliament starts jamming sticks into the wheels of government simply because there is no king strong enough to push back. And as for the regent, oh no, not one regent. There will be an entire council of regents because the number of people eager to rule instead of the king was, let's say, a lot. This results in what can only be described as a full-blown uncleocracy. Every second guy is an uncle of the king, a brother of the previous king, or at least a distant cousin with ambitions. Gloucesters, Bedfords, Beauforts, the major families of England all deeply connected to the royal bloodline. Lancasters, Proto-Yorks, though at this stage they aren't yet two clean opposing clans. So essentially it's a real unction, the LA Clippers of medieval England. So obviously chaos begins, everyone is pulling the blanket towards themselves. One says, I am the Lord Protector of the King. Another guy says, well, I'm his governor then. And the governor then goes, since I'm the governor, let's raise taxes for the war in France. And then some other lords turn around and says, who the hell are you? Who are you to collect war taxes from me? When the king took taxes, that I understood. Henry V said, boys, we need money for the war, everyone chips in, and that made sense. But you're just some uncle. Well, guess what? I'm also the king's uncle. We're equals. You don't get to tell me to pay anything. And almost every lord in England responds the same way. So this tomfoolery gets to the point when later an official decree is issued, like we're going to collect a war tax, and another lord responds to London with, guess what? Come and take it. A perfectly reasonable medieval reply. You can already see where this leads, yes? This is one of the core reasons for the crisis. Nobody understands who is actually governing England. You have a couple dozen men, all convinced that they should be in charge and each doing whatever they want. So, the second major crisis connected to all this is simple.
Not enough gold.
There is no money. So, all those brilliant victories of Henry V.
I was not angry since I came to France. Until this instant.
Yeah, the entire Hundreds-Year War, the English crown was basically drowning in debt. They were broke in the most glamorous way possible. And honestly, this started even earlier. By the 13th century, English kings had already developed a lifelong hobby, spending way more money than they actually had. Chronic overspending, chronic debt, chronic denial. King's gonna king. And in the old days, it was not an issue, since a strong king could simply walk in and say, all right, everyone shut your traps. I forgive all of my debts. Boom, solved. But with a baby on the throne, not even a child, a literal toddler, and a bunch of squabbling uncles, that trick doesn't work anymore. No one has the authority to walk in and press the erase debt button. Meanwhile, out in the shires, because the country is basically a DIY monarchy at this point, local lords start thinking, maybe this is my moment to shine. So, for example, Lord Gloucester decides in 1427 to lower certain taxes. And suddenly he becomes wildly popular. Oh wow, Lord Gloucester is so amazing. He lowered taxes. And instantly the crown writes him a furious letter like Caleb Hammer. Excuse me, what are you doing lowering taxes? Hey, money, where's the money supposed to come from? So some random noble cancels the taxes for an entire city. And so now the city loves him, they're carrying him around like a medieval rock star, but the treasury is empty. Yeah, fantastic. And he's not the only one. Everyone does whatever they want, remember. This is just one example, because what? The king is a baby. He won't be coming here to fight. So the uncles realize, okay, we need new taxes, we need order, we need to figure out who is actually running this country. So they had a council. No, wait, a full-on parliament in Leicester. And here comes the part that really shows where things were going. They announced we're holding parliament, please come, without swords. Swords are forbidden. Look, if you have to explicitly tell your parliament, guys, please let's not bring swords this time, that's literally a major red flag. And history calls this assembly the Parliament of Bats. Because yes, everyone obeyed the no swords rule, but they all showed up carrying clubs, brass knuckles, and the big wooden bats instead. Yeah, so they didn't fight that day. Not yet, nothing violent happened at that moment. In 1429, Joan of Arc appears, and it honestly feels like the English didn't really notice her, like at all. Yeah, the English in France, like Lord Talbot and the others, yes, they noticed her, of course, but when Joan of Arc was finally captured and burned at the stake, that was essentially French business. Yeah, I will talk about this whole story in some other video, it deserves it, it's just as funny. Yeah, so the thing is that inside England at that moment, people had much bigger problems, and frankly, they weren't that interested in what was happening over there, and there is a major reason for that. Essentially, they also discovered something very unpleasant. As soon as you leave for the war in France, people back home start messing with you. Those who want to defend Paris, protect their new lands, protect English possessions, they go off to fight. But while they are away, they can't show up in parliament with a big stick to defend their interests. And the moment they are gone, everyone at home suddenly finds infinite reasons to take something from them. And we'll see it again and again. You ride off to France and yeah, that means you're a sucker. Because while you're away, you lose your privileges, you get pushed out of the court, and decisions about your stuff are made without you. This, by the way, will seriously undermine the entire English war effort in France. You can send some little bro to act as your deputy, but in this era physical presence matters the most. If you send some cousin to rule where you should be, for example in Normandy, the locals will say, and who are you supposed to be? We obey, I don't know, Lord 50 Pences, the king's brother, he is the one in charge, who the hell are you? Get lost. So you have to choose. Either you are in France trying to manage the war and maintain English authority, or you are sitting at home trying to hold on to your estates with both hands, afraid someone is going to take them. For example, the previous king's brother, Humphrey of Gloucester, let's make him Littlefinger, you'll get it later. His wife gets accused of witchcraft while he's away. Even if they can't reach you, they'll reach your wife. This escalation is real, and by the way, this is already 1441, when his wife Eleanor is accused of witchcraft, allegedly planning to send the king to his grave, to make him less functional, let's put it that way. Yeah, so she stands trial and, well, she's sentenced quite harshly. See, go off to France, and look what happens to your wife. They force her to walk through London wearing little to nothing and holding a candle. She must walk with public repentance in front of the entire city, visit 3 key churches, enter each one and light a candle. So essentially it is a public humiliation ritual because she is a witch, repent witch for practicing witchcraft. Naturally the entire city gathers to watch. When there is no TikTok or YouTube, this is prime entertainment. Yeah, just imagine your wife parading through the city nude, and then there are some tavern wenches doing dances and challenges on the sidelines. So all of London stands there watching your wife walk around half stripped doing penance. So would you want to go to fight in France? Yeah, and even that is in the end. She gets sentenced to life imprisonment afterwards. And Humphrey of Gloucester himself, yeah, he gets taken down as well, and in a very ugly way. He comes back and tries to sort things out, and later he is arrested too. They claim he is a traitor, that he is plotting against the king, and he is imprisoned, and suddenly he dies. The official explanation, a heart attack. He was just so stressed that he dropped dead. A very convenient heart attack, let's say, and this is another one of the causes of the crisis. Our king is gradually growing up through all these years. When he turns 10, he is crowned king of France. He undergoes a full coronation in Paris, and for the record, Henry VI is the only king in English history who was actually crowned both as king of England and king of France. English kings would continue to style themselves as kings of France in their titles all the way until Napoleon's era, but they would no longer be crowned for that throne. Henry VI, however, really did manage to be crowned as king of France. Good for you, Bobby. Good for you. This didn't help much because the king grows up, he turns 16, and formally the regency is supposed to end in 1437, when the king should begin ruling on his own. But first of all, nobody wants to give up power. Things were going so well for everyone. Think about it. When he became king, he was a baby. Everyone knew that for the next 15 years at least they had no authority over them. People understood this would last a long time, but it ended up lasting even longer, because by the time Henry reaches adolescence, those around him and everyone else already clearly understand that ruling is probably not going to work out. Henry simply doesn't behave like a king. And what does it even mean, behaving like a king? Look, a king of that era is supposed to hold jousts, have dozens of baby mamas, enjoy fighting, rush into France to reclaim lost territories, catch arrows with his face, just like his dad, and squeeze money out of the parliament and Jews. That's what a king is expected to do. But Henry VI? Nah. He'd rather read a book, stand through a liturgy. He was withdrawn. When he begins attending council sessions, where important matters are being discussed, he's openly bored. He sits there, he sits here, and suddenly starts crossing himself out of nowhere, or he shows up wearing some absurd shoes, completely unkingly, unroyal behavior, and completely unroyal interests. So imagine Robert Baratheon, but cute, I guess. Sometimes you can read in sources that the problem was visible even in childhood, because later in adulthood he will begin experiencing episodes and fits much like his grandfather Charles VI, who is also known as the Mad. Remember, Henry is a grandson of the French King Charles VI. On his mother's side, he is French. On his father's side, he is English, French, depends on how you look at it. His father had deliberately married a French princess to unite the two crowns. And so Henry is crowned king of both France and England. Everything seems wonderful on paper, but in reality, no. Charles VI completely lost his mind. He believed he was made of glass and begged people not to break him. Henry VI will not have episodes that extreme, but he will have catatonic stupors and periods of unresponsiveness in adulthood that could last for years. So yes, sometimes you will see the idea that he was like this since childhood, so nothing good could be expected. Honestly, no, because when something actually interested him, he achieved results. He was passionate about education. If the topic was something he cared about, not wars, Not all that bloodshed, but say studying Latin, studying law, that he enjoyed. And he actually became the founder of two extremely prestigious English colleges. First, King's College in Cambridge, founded for the most gifted students, educated entirely for free. This is what Henry liked doing. Look, even today, the coat of arms of the King's College has the French fleur-de-lis. Why? Because it was founded by Henry VI, who was also the King of France. Some of his legacy survived like that. He also founded Eton College, much larger, around 70 boys studied there from the beginning. It was founded as what we would call today a charity school. Education is fundamentally free, but you're required to live there. Of course, the school itself has grown massively. Many more students attend now, and most pay tuition. But to this day, in Eton, you can find a monument that is not dedicated to some random figure, it is dedicated to Henry VI. Again, the one who, in most sources and in history books, is always described as a loser king, a king who was basically useless, but in reality he invested and did a lot when it comes to English education, and the results are still important these days. And yes, people call him a loser, but you have to understand how this looked to his contemporaries, especially all those uncles who ruled on his behalf. Imagine this man stomp into the hall, armor clanking, and say, "So, I have a claim on this village, and the right to collect this or that tax," and he says it's his privilege, who should be executed, who should be pardoned, who is right, "Judge, your majesty." And the king sits there like, "Broskis, let's not be ops, don't hit each other, let's all go to church together, pray, make peace, hug, light some candles, and the village or whatever, it will sort itself out somehow." So, yeah, his advisors probably did think he was a loser because, well, yes, this wasn't the right place or the right time for a king like that. For a mid-15th century English king, he really wasn't suited. Although, again, I don't agree that he was that incompetent. He could function. On the other hand, this was a way to reach him if you approached him through what he actually liked, such as education. For example, the same Humphrey of Gloucester who ends badly. They all end badly, by the way, Martin didn't invent that. So mentioning who dies not their own death is pointless because essentially everyone from this era dies horribly. But anyway, he could approach the king and say, "Your Majesty, I have a library that will blow your mind. Greek writers, Latin writers, French writers, English." Well, English writing had only just begun. It wasn't considered prestigious literature yet, but legends about King Arthur from the 13th century, that's interesting. Look how many books I have. Ancient authors, everything. And Humphrey of Gloucester donates to the library that still exists today in Oxford. The Duke Humphreys Library is named after him. And this was the first serious library that formed the basis of the university's larger book collections. But he also did this in order to approach the king. To give you an idea, Oxford at that moment had already existed for about 300 years. And where did Humphrey get his books? He really was educated and collected them. He genuinely cared, and learned people overall cared too. And military men were interested as well. In France, they captured a lot of things. In Reims, in Paris, in Rouen, in Cherbourg. In all those large cities, they seized valuable manuscripts. The Oxford University Library consisted of about 40 to 50 books. And Humphrey of Gloucester donated 281 books from his collection. So you can understand how much more the lords possessed at the time. This allowed you to approach the king. You dealt with what the king was interested in, books. So you could come to him and say, "Dear Henry, we're doing great, discussing books, knowledge and all, but you know that man over there? Yeah, that guy. He doesn't like education at all, and he doesn't even go to church to pray. We two, you and me, are great and educated guys. That dude, he's not like us. He doesn't deserve shit. How about we take a bit of his land and give it to me? Or maybe to you. Or maybe send him to exile in Ireland. Something like that. Let's do this." Yeah, so I hope you understand now why he's the little finger. This, of course, was also part of the political game, and access to the king's person, especially once he grew up and supposedly ruled on his own, was extremely important. though in reality he never ruled independently. He was always under the strong influence of certain people. These people kept changing, but they always pointed Henry in some direction. So who actually had more power? Formally, of course, the king. But in this era, everything slowly shifts toward Parliament. Because Parliament, instead of just approving or rejecting things and acting as a counterweight to the king, becomes essentially an independent body, one that can condemn and pardon, one that becomes extremely important in all politics. And for example, one of the leading figures, and this will matter later, will be William de la Pole. So let's give him a more recognizable face. William is John Arryn, the closest person to the king. Anyway, William de la Pole is a major military man from the time of the current king's father. He fought at Agincourt, he served in France, he knows how the whole system works, and now he realizes that France is boring, and he needs to secure influence back at home with the king. And this William de la Pole, and in particular he understands that the king needs a wife, and not a useless one like the king himself. He needs, so to speak, a tough woman. A serious wife, like from the posters. They specifically start looking for such a woman, and the person capable of fighting her will, of course, be William de la Pole himself. He finds her and brings her to court, and through the new queen he gains even more influence. He says, "Look, what I have found for you, beautiful, educated, intelligent Margaret of Anjou, who also has an impressive lineage." Again, why was she chosen? Her mother, even in chronicles, it was written that she ruled her duchy like a man. And at the time, don't misunderstand, this was meant as a compliment. She is a woman, but she actually understands things like a man. Her mother was like that. Her grandmother from Aragon was also formidable. And so she was chosen. And by the way, they weren't wrong. The girl took after them. She really will play a major role in the Wars of the Roses. She is Cersei Lannister. So he brings her in and says, "Here, a proper wife from France." And what's most important, the king really didn't like war. He kept saying, "Why are we fighting the French? This is bloodshed. This is not Christian. Jesus said to love thy enemies. People go around shanking each other. What's the point?" And William says, "First of all, this wife, she is Anjou. She's French, and we can make peace with France in 1444. We will sign peace and the war altogether, everything will be wonderful." The king is delighted. So they bring him the bride, and the first thing he said, you will never guess it. Who is she? Yeah, he's not exactly a ladies' man. When they were introduced, it is said that he just stood there drooling. Well, fine, no big deal. By now, everyone had already understood that as a king and a man, Henry was hopeless. So they agree, the 100 Years' War is over, everything is great. We'll make peace, we'll get the French bride, and life will be wonderful, right? Wrong. Because you might ask, what do the French get out of this? Well, here is the catch. William de la Pole secretly makes an agreement with the French that England will hand over the county of Maine on the continent, and the English quietly withdraw, set themselves up elsewhere. We will keep Normandy, but Maine we will give to you. This was completely secret because if he had gone to Parliament and announced at home in England that we were simply giving French territory away for a bride, well, normally a bride comes with a dowry. She had no dowry, she wasn't from the richest family, so instead the English king Henry VI effectively gives away continental land as her dowry, and of course they will find out immediately after the fact. But it will be too late. Protests start. One of the commanders in France, a serious pro-war figure, appears named Richard, Earl of York. You understand where the thing is going. Ned Stark is in the building, guys. And that's how Yorks appear on the stage. They're not yet a fully formed faction, nothing especially serious yet. They're also Plantagenets, they're also relatives, they're no less well-bred, and in fact they're actually more well-bred than the Lancasters. When Henry IV's Bolingbroke, the first Lancaster king, took the throne, there were already questions. Why are you king? You're not even the closest relative. But he had real force behind him. After that, several kings passed and people just let it slide. But originally the Yorks had bigger claim. And this particular York, he's the next in line to the throne. Look, the king has no children and won't have any for at least the next 8 years. And this man is not only pro-war with France and against giving up land on the continent, he's also the nearest heir if something happens to Henry VI. And he starts protesting. What are you doing? So they send him away to the middle of nowhere. Yeah, the first canon divergence. Jon Arryn exiles Eddard Stark because Ned was too bloodthirsty and power-hungry. The show and book fans definitely didn't see that coming, and at the time, the middle of nowhere was Ireland, so they exile him to Ireland, go sort things out there, they say. Meanwhile, people start complaining that basically we surrendered territory without a fight. What was Delapol's logic? Delapole says, guys, the French have united with the Burgundians. The Burgundians used to be on our side. They even sold us Joan of Arc back in the day. The French king was involved, but it's a different story. Different. The English didn't capture Joan of Arc. The Burgundians did. So they were on England's side. Now they have switched. They are with France now. And we cannot hold everything we conquered on the continent. We just can't. We need to fortify Gascony, fortify Normandy. These are our core lands, and give up everything else because we're overstretched and we will collapse otherwise. That was Delapol's logic. And at the moment, he says, at least we will have peace, at least we will keep Normandy. That's not bad. A whole Normandy. We'll do just fine. For this, he is given titles of Suffolk. So he has even bigger influence at court. Yeah, he's a big shot, the hand of the king. Again, why did he do it, despite being a war veteran himself? Yet he surrendered parts of France, for personal influence, of course. And that's a feature of the time. Without understanding this, the last stage of the 100 Years' War doesn't make sense. Why did the English keep winning in France for so long? And then everything suddenly fell apart. Yes, there were reasons on the French side. France reorganized and pulled itself together. That's important. But on the English side, it's also crucial that these kinds of divisions and problems existed. There was simply no central guiding force. It's profitable for me now. I need this now, so I will surrender Maine. And what will you do to me? I'm Earl of Suffolk now. And as for the fact that these were royal lands, yeah, whatever, take them, who cares? Honestly, all of this collapses into shit because the French had no intention of stopping. French used the peace to reorganize, assemble proper armies, build more artillery, bring in more infantry, and 5 years later, they simply invade and wipe out Normandy. A mega campaign that in literally less than 1 year, the French regroup, come in and just erase Normandy and all English holdings there, Rouen, Cherbourg, Cayenne, everything. And suddenly there are questions for Delapole. Brother, you said we surrendered Maine 5 years ago to bring the Queen and secure Normandy, and now what's this? 5 years later, Normandy is lost too? What the fuck? By the way, here is another important detail. When they concluded the peace in 1444, that's it. Peace is signed, no more war, everything is wonderful. An enormous number of troops suddenly became free, and during the 100 Years' War, all these troops had become mercenaries. They served on indentured contracts. They all fought for money. As an example, when the war ended after Poitiers back in Brittany, in the 14th century, what happened then? All those soldiers went off to plunder Spain. Spain. Or they started plundering their own lands in Gascony, turned into bandits, and so on. When that many troops, tens of thousands of men who have been fighting, suddenly lose their war because peace has been declared, nothing could be worse for them. Because for them, peace means hunger. Peace means going broke. Nobody pays them. This time, though, they don't need to become bandits. Do you know why? Because the lords had been waiting for this. Earlier, the lords couldn't hire a private army because all the soldiers were already contracted to fight in France. But now, they were all free. And all these lords who had been sitting in the parliament with clubs in their hands after 20 years of rising tensions now had the opportunity to reinforce their claims not only with words, but with something way more substantial, with armed forces. They all start buying themselves armies. Look, this isn't feudal obligation anymore. Under feudal law, only the king could summon service. And you yourself could only summon your direct vassals, maybe 20 to 30 guys including your gardener, who personally owed you duty, and that's it. But now the armies are contract armies. Now I can hire as many men as my purse allows. And here is a surprising fact. Because England had learned how to wage war, how to gather armies, how to supply armies. Due to the constant, unending medieval warfare, we will see lords being able to rise up to 10,000 men. Armies the size of what the kings of England used to field against France in the 100 Years' War. Two kingdoms clashed, each sending 10 to 15,000. In the Wars of the Roses, lords raise armies like that for themselves to fight for buckets, cattle, and berry bushes. That's the rise in stakes. And when the French come 5 years later, in France, there are no English troops left. The lords have hired them all for themselves to build private armies to defend private interests back home in England. So when the English lords in France, those who are appointed, those who are supposed to govern, say, hello, I'm raising an army, I'm paying money, fellas, boys, they simply cannot find enough dudes to fill the ranks. Throughout the 1440s, there was a chronic shortage. Soldiers, resources, everything. This was a huge problem, yet another reason for the catastrophic defeats at the end of the war. Everyone went home to fight in England, and so, yes, the French sweep everything away. A bit of medieval political wisdom. Nothing is worse for a king than losing a war. It immediately makes him look weak. People start asking, why do we even need a king? If he can't smash anybody on the battlefield, that's his only purpose. When it turned out, alright, fine, we're losing sieges, losing towns, losing castles, but now we will go out into an open field and just like at Agincourt, we will smack these frog eaters across the head and they will go flying. They gather at Formigny and the French annihilate them completely. So what now? What do? A rebellion. Of course, a rebellion rises at home. The so-called Jack Cates Rebellion. Townspeople, free peasants, merchants, traders, the urban elites all rise up. And what's funny is that, yes, of course, their main rally point is the war, because their number one demand is, hello, king, what's up? Could you maybe, I don't know, start winning in France? We are losing. We demand you to stop losing and start winning. Simpler times. But in 1450, they also brought out other demands. For example, one of the main grievances was this. Parliament is elected badly. Parliament is supposed to represent us, the merchant class, the important people, the small local aristocracy, but in reality, Parliament is completely controlled by these giant corporate lords who own whole counties, Somerset, Gloucester, Suffolk. Anyway, one of the complaints is, why do only the big lords run everything? Sure, everyone technically sits in parliament, but the big magnates are the ones who actually control all decisions. Where's the representation for smaller people? Why don't we decide anything? Another complaint. The king has bad advisors. Someone is whispering garbage into the king's ears, giving him the worst advice possible. We see him giving land to the wrong people, taking estates away from perfectly normal lords and handing them to absolute idiots, at least in the rebel size. Clearly, the king got bad advice, they say. So another demand, king, stop handing out land to random clowns. And that's why they also demand that Richard, Duke of York, be brought back from Ireland. We need Ned Stark. Everybody knew he supported the war. He was against surrendering Maine 5 years earlier. He said back then that France needs this breathing room to rebuild and that you are giving them exactly the pause they want. Turns out, he was right. So they say, bring back Richard of York. That guy had good head on his shoulders. Bring him back from Ireland. He will give you the right advice. And Richard has to be brought back. Many lords also support the rebellion's demands, so yes, the lords joined this movement as well. And they even launched an impeachment, by the way, against William de la Pole, John Arryn, the guy who brought the Queen to England. They say, what have you done? This is practically treason. Parliament removes him. Parliament invites York to take his place as the king's chief advisor, and they tell Suffolk, get lost, go into exile. They wanted to execute him at first, but as usual, the king stepped in. They wanted to kill him right there, but the king said, brothers, don't murder him. He's a good guy. Let's send him to Calais. Exile will be enough. Well, somewhere on the way to Calais, something happened, and his headless body washed up on the shores near Dover, that rocky cliff coast of England. Why did his headless body suddenly appear there? Who knows? Maybe the rebels caught him, since this was happening parallel to Jack Cade's rebellion. Officially, they say pirates attacked him. Sure. Very convenient that pirates somehow magically knew which ship the disgraced Duke was on. So yeah, the mystery case is solved. It wasn't the Lannisters or Littlefinger who killed Jon Arryn in Game of Thrones. It was Ned Stark, all along. The power-hungry monster. Anyway, one of the first major high-profile victims of outright political murder was William de la Pole. The 100 Years' War doesn't end there, it keeps going. The French fully reorganized and rearmed start taking everything back. Gascony, Bordeaux, all of those southern regions. By 1453 they retake them. And Richard of York is advising the nearest heir if something happens to the king. Turns out he isn't as competent as rebels thought. But in 1453, Henry VI, the maybe weak, maybe not so functional king, and his wife Margaret of Anjou suddenly have a son, a perfectly fine baby boy. You know, right?
I like the way you kiss me. I can tell you miss me. I can tell it is. Not trying to be romantic. I hit it from the back. Just so you don't get it.
And now the heir is the baby, not Richard of York, who actually came back from Ireland expecting to take control, run the war properly and fix things. Now the birth of this new son pushes York further down the line of succession. Ned is angry. Also, the complete collapse in France, loss of ancient ancestral lands the English kings believed was theirs. From such psychological trauma, Henry VI, who was in his early 20s, snaps. Whether from the stress of losing the war or from feeling betrayed by the French, whom he literally wrote love letters, he literally said, "I love you more than anyone except my wife," or from the collapse of everything he believed in. He suffers his first mental breakdown. He falls into a catatonic state, he doesn't respond to his name, barely understands what's happening, just sits and stares into the void. And everyone around him immediately understands one thing. Whoever becomes Lord Protector now rules England. After this, the first serious clashes begin, actual military confrontations. And into this chaos, the king's wife, Margaret of Anjou, bursts in like a hurricane. Because now she's not just some poor French girl married to a half-functional king, she's the mother of the next king. Her son is also named Edward, because apparently every second man in England is either Richard or Edward or Henry. And anyway, Margaret of Anjou turns out to be very energetic, especially after William de la Pole loses his head on the cliffs of Dover. With him gone, and with her son born, she understands that now she has full freedom of action, and she takes it all. She essentially becomes the leader of the royalist faction, the group we now call the Lancastrians. She leads, she gives orders, she acts, and she calls for a great parliament session in 1455. The official goal: remove the Yorkists from power. Because now, with new Lancastrian heir, they say, why do we even need Yorks? They were respected before because York was the heir, but now not anymore. So Parliament of 1455 removes the Yorks from power. And well, that's bad for the Yorks. They gather their armies immediately. What happens next? Yeah, that will be in the second part.
Never leaving, no one coming right back. I know that he need it, cause shorty gon' bite back. And he don't want nobody else sitting there like that.